Hello, everyone. Hello. As promised last week, that's a recording that I did, 20 years ago at least, with I think it's the main voice there is our daughter Abigail, and you can hear my voice in the background. We did it in our dining room. It's a rendition of a chant from Taizé of in Resurrectione, about the resurrection. But the melody, I love the melody so much, and I applied it to our Kabbalat Shabbat, our Friday evening prayers, to Psalm 96, Shiru Adonai Shir Chadash, sing unto the Lord a new song. I mentioned last week that this is a new song for us, for both Steve Kinney and myself. It's a new song, and that we're teaching a book that we haven't taught. We're studying it in depth, a book that we haven't taught before, something from our sacred tradition, um, sacred tradition, perhaps once removed. I see we have at least one or two people here that weren't with us last week, or at least one person. I don't know that we need to go over everything we did. The recording exists, but we did want to just talk about, I wanted to raise just a few things that came up last week, and raise them not to complete the conversation, but to kind of, put a pin in them for us to continue. One of them is Harold wrote to me afterwards about an article he'd written about the Tobiads, and yeah, the Tobiads were a well-known family in ancient times, probably from First Temple period. They're known from the Book of Maccabees. And how is this connected? I don't know yet. I want to read a little bit more to see if this is perhaps a tale from this well-known family of ancient Israel. And this is one of their kind of their house origin story, one of those kinds of things. Is that what this is or not? Don't have an answer on that yet, but I'll keep looking and reading on that. And the other thing was what something that Don brought up about the theological importance. Is there a theological importance to the Book of Tovia? And I said we'd be looking at that. I ordered a collection of articles that should come in the mail in the next week or so, um, that is on the theology of the Book of Tobit, of Tobit. And so I'll hopefully I'm looking for things there, and then as we get to those passages, we can talk more deeply about it. But what struck me in my reading so far is that in Judaism, as I think everybody knows, and this is one of our goals, right, is that it's not just about faith. Not that it's just about faith in Christianity either, but that's kind of an old stereotype that Judaism is about, Christianity is about faith, and Judaism is about practice, faith and practice. Um, in practice, that is halakha, Jewish law, that's a reflection of theology, right? How we go through the day. Halakha means to walk. It comes from the same word as walking. How we handle ourselves, how we plan our day, how we react to things. There's a rule for everything in the Jewish tradition, and that way much more than in all the different Christian traditions, even if certain parts of Christianity seem to be more rigid or more practice oriented. And there's a theology in that. And what we have in it reflects what we have in Tobit is an emphasis on certain kinds of acts. What we have in Tobit are prayers, we have petitions, we looked last week, we saw that he was very careful about the tithing at the temple, but the tithing at the temple, although it's the temple, is less about the temple and more about social issues of economic, yeah, from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, helping those who are in need, whether they are the poor or whether they are the Levites, who don't have land of their own. And so as we look, and we're going to have a section of that today, and also a reflection from Talmudic literature, as we look at the deeds, the halakha, the practice that are two of our both of our heroes, but the one that we're reading about now, um, that they deal with, there's a theology in that. And the theology that's in that, Don, is that each and every human being is created in God's image. So when I treat another human being with dignity, then that's my treating of God. That's my service to God as well. Now, this is not different than Christianity, right? Certainly not different, and I'm sure there'll be associations that we come up with in one of the sections that we're going to do today. Those are my reflections on last week. Steve, is there anything you wanted to say before
David, I wanted to ask you again about the root of halakha. You said it's walking.
we?
That's
The
a
Hebrew
wonderful.
word is hey lamed kaf halach, and so halacha, yeah, that's what. And so halachic literature is the body of laws. I mean, so now I have books from all, from all walks of life, but for many years, the books that I had coming out of my seminary years and before I got into Bible studies was almost all halachic literature. That was my love. I did not do so well in Talmud. There's a whole world of hypothetical halacha and Talmudic discussion. I kind of got a little bit lost there when I was younger. I do better at it today, perhaps. But so I focused on what do we take from the Talmud that we actually do today in the 20th century. It was the 20th century at the time. Okay. And so the way that shapes up in an Orthodox education is you study a lot of Talmud, you study to sharpen your wit, you study because you're continuing something that's been done for hundreds of years, but you're also studying to know what to do. But the knowing what to do is actually off to the side and not as important. In the day of a yeshiva student, most of the day is dedicated to that Talmud study itself. On the side of the page in the Talmud, there's footnotes that refer to the Shulchan Aruch, which is Rabbi Yosef Karo's great work from the 16th century in the land of Israel, uh, in which he collected, according to his own logic, how we learn or what we do on a day-to-day basis in all the walks of life. And that's actually based on the other footnotes that's in the margin. There is Maimonides' great work called the Yad HaChazakah, the strong arm or the strong hand, also called Mishneh Torah, which is a recycling of a term used to refer to Deuteronomy. That's what Deuteronomy means. Deuteronomos is Mishneh Torah. And so Moses, not Moses the prophet, but Moses ben Maimonides, Rambam, he wrote this great work in which he distilled all the halacha from Talmudic literature in a way, according to Aristotelian logic, how so that people, intellectuals at his time, 12th century, would be able to find what they're looking for. In the Talmud, you have to know it backwards and forwards if you really want to find what you're looking for. Today we have indices, of course, and we have databases. So all that is halacha. The halacha is perhaps what you have to do day to day, and that's what I focused on because that's what I could grab onto when I was younger. Then I went into biblical studies, and so a lot of my books are about. But I still have a passion for that halachic literature because
And that did I misunderstand it? It's connected to walking, you
yes,
said?
yeah, the root is walking. So it's basically how do you
Ah,
walk through life?
nice. Okay.
Right? It's not the actual walking. It's not like, say, Thich Nhat Hanh
Right.
in the walking meditation, but it's connected to that as well. How do you go through life? Walking and going, same word. Going. How do you go through life?
Like a path, like a path.
Exactly like a path. Yeah, and
On the Torah.
yeah, and we're going to see the something about that in the Talmud today. The path. How do you walk in the path of God, for instance? Um, And so these are interesting things to think about. Now let's zoom out for a second and around our table of people that go to church, who have been to church on a regular basis in their lives, people who go to synagogue or people who just participate in this kind of a study. How do we talk about our way of life? By the way, pathway, way of life. How do we decide what our way of life is going to be? How much of it comes from the houses we grew up in? How much do we decide to do it differently? What do we base those decisions upon? Let's go back now to the book of Tobit. Tobit is giving us a living, thriving example, at least it's purporting to give us a snapshot, a video of these lives of pious people, people who are walking in the right path, people whose ways of life. And that, Don, to me is theology, even though I know that's not the theoretical work of use of the word of theology, perhaps. Um, yeah. So, and we will infer from how the narrator describes what the good Jew acts like in his life. We'll be able to infer from that what this Jew feels about God as well and thinks about God. Les, did you want to say something?
No,
Oh, okay.
Um, David, I last question is so is Tobit a poster child for the good Jew from this diasporan perspective? All of those practices, the way he walks his path, burying the dead, which got him into a lot of trouble. Is that is he a stereotype, a caricature, an idealized version?
Yeah, okay. So stereotype, I don't think that helps us. That doesn't help us grow the conversation. You may what we're is he is a role model? Yes. Is he a poster child? I like that. Is he a caricature? Perhaps. There is some there the commentators talk about a lot of irony in this book. Not my
Well, that's
expertise.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's humor.
there is humor, a lot of irony, yet still, I think that the overall purpose of this book, the way I see it now, but well, let's have this conversation in 10 months from now, right? When we finish the text or whenever that
Okay.
is. Let's go revisit this. To me, yes, this is an example of how one should live one's life. If we slide over a second to other apocryphal books, we have in our 24 sacred books of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Esther, right? Esther,
Mhm.
we'd say from a feminist point of view, especially since feminism and biblical and feminine or yeah, feminist critique of Bible, that Esther, what a great role model. She's assertive. She wrote, she's on her own. She's got a man supporting her. She's got another man there, but she's really kind of calling the shot. She's making it happen. Except for the problem with that role model, right? From a Jewish point of view. What food is she eating when she's in the palace? How can she be having sex with this non-Jewish yokel, whose name is Achashverosh? Where does that, where is God in that book? There's no God, mention of God. Where is prayer? There's no prayer in that book. If I'm an educator in the third, this is something I said just the other day in a different course, that's why it's in my mind. If I'm an educator, Jewish educator in the third century, second century BCE, and I have a girls' school because that's, the school for the girls. That I don't want them to be Esther. Instead, I will create another narrative which is very similar to Esther in outline as far as saving the day. And instead of calling the woman Esther, which comes from Astarte, which is a pagan name, I will call her Yehudit, the Jewish woman. And hence we get the book of Judith. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but the book of Judith is the alter ego of Esther, but the one that Jewish educators want their females, young women students to follow.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Glad to know that. Okay, well, that's great. And I don't know if Rita, Claire, and Megan, were y'all here last week? I didn't think so. So good to see you, Megan and Rita, Claire.
And we
Okay.
have Danit, who it says on your screen, Diane, were you with us last week?
Thank you for saying that. I
Um,
appreciate it.
no, I listened to the YouTube.
Great. Yes. Okay. Yes. We our frequent flyer, the one who gets the most frequent flyer points on Orami Bar YouTube channel, that's Diane here. She's going through the whole library. Don, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering what your thoughts were about the Christian scriptures outlining this path to holiness. Maybe I'm equating a synonym with teacher and shower of a path, but I think the same thing applies for Christian literature that you're describing. It is giving a path to bond with God.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates with me. First, your comment about teacher and finder of path, shower of path. That's what the word means. More means the guide, the person, the instructor, the guide. Torah means instruction. We use it as the five books of Moses, but the basic word is instruction, showing the way. Lahorot et derech. So absolutely. My first reaction to Don, what you say, other than absolute agreement, is that to me, that's the point of the Gospels. The stories of Jesus on this earth is to say, look at you guys, you sages, you leaders, you intellectual leaders of the Pharisees, of the group that he comes from. You're very concerned with halakha, with Jewish law, but you're missing the point. And Jesus's point wasn't to abolish the halakha. Jesus' point was to be more flexible or liberal or progressive or however we want to say, but to interpret it differently instead of putting this assumed desire of God's will in front of us to put the expression of God on this earth, um, i- each human being created in God's own image, in front of us. In other words, to focus on the person as opposed. That's how I see it in an oversimplistic way. Okay. Any other preliminary comments? Okay, I also promised last week to just to recheck. This is one of two volumes, Hasfarim Achitzonim, which literally means the outer books, the books on the outside, which is apocryphal literature. It's actually four volumes, but in this edition is two, which is a really interesting project that began at the beginning of the 20th century in Zhytomyr in Ukraine by a man named Avraham Kahana. And I know a little bit about this because I wrote a paper about him in rabbinical school. Whatever it was, we had a Jewish history course, whatever. And the fascinating thing for this is he brought together a number of scholars from Europe, and then eventually he moved. Avraham Kahana moved from Zhytomyr to or from no, he was in Poland, Warsaw, to Israel in the 20s, and he became head of a publishing house. He was a teacher, self-educated man, brilliant, taught himself ancient languages, Hebrew, of course, as well, but also all sorts of ancient languages, not just Greek and Latin, and really a fascinating guy. And he brought together scholars whose expertise were connected to each of these books, much like the Anchor Bible or other series. But they took all of these texts that were in other languages, Greek, Latin, Ethiopic, whatever there, and with various manuscripts. It's done in a very scholarly academic way, and reconstructed the text into biblical Hebrew. So the idea was, why would somebody do that? It's kind of like today, if we were to find a Dead Sea Scroll that we didn't know about beforehand, and there was a kind of evangelical publishing house, this is a little, I'm just making this up, right? Who wanted to put it out, maybe they would use King James English to give it that sound of authenticity. Even if that's not a real case, right? I think that's what I would say. If you want to make it sound authentic. And why would they do this? Why would these scholars get together? This is a totally side issue, but I think important for our work together. Why would these scholars come together under Kahana beginning from the beginning of the 19th century until it was published like in the 30s, to do this? It's part of the Zionist renewal of the Hebrew language and a reclaiming of Jewish traditions that had been lost. Something I said last week. Jews didn't know. My Zayde, right? My grandfather, my father's father, he didn't hear. He never heard of this. He was an Orthodox man. I can almost guarantee you he never heard of the book of Tobit. He probably never heard of the word apocrypha either, right? If he heard the New Testament, he would have, shunned. He would have pushed it away. But these scholars, as part of the new, and this is part of Zionist ideology as well, to reclaim that which was in the past, not only the land itself, but also the culture, and I say also with an eye on pluralism. I think they wanted to show that there was more to Judaism, much more to Judaism than just the rabbis of the Talmud, the way many of us Ashkenazic Jews at least, but also Sephardic Jews, received it over centuries. And to me, that's an interesting thing as well. So I'll be consulting. It took me a while to find where this was. I'll be consulting it wasn't Khan, it's a guy named Dov Hiller, who was also fascinating, a Hungarian scholar and rabbi, who did the translation and the critical edition of Tobit here. Okay, I think I fulfilled all the obligations of last week. Ralph, have you been with us before?
Ralph, you're on mute. Ralph's a good friend of mine. He knows your cousin,
Oh, great.
and Ralph is in my Wednesday morning group, and I got him to join us today.
That's great. Well, welcome, Ralph. Good to meet you. Okay, so we're at the sheets that we sent out. Yeah, I think she sent it. Madalena sent it out again, but it's the same sheet as last week. We'll have a new sheet next week, and we reached the second page. On the second or the third page, we did not go into detail with the different tithing, and I kind of said let's let it suffice that tithing is an interesting topic, a complicated topic. There are different voices, different traditions in the five books of Moses about, well, it's really, anyway, in the Torah about what the tithe consisted of. In rabbinic literature, it's already been developed in such a way, and as we see from Tobit as well before then, that it's not just, there are multiple tithes to give. There's at least two tithes to give, maybe even three, which is a lot of your income. So, to my mind, I don't feel that we need to get in. I think we'll get lost in the weeds here, and I would like to continue with verse 10 if that's possible.
More than income, it's a lot of schlepping.
Yeah, right. I think that there were Levites, the Levitical families in different places that you could give it to them if they were in your own town. So not everything goes to the temple. But yes, the idea of schlepping is actually emphasized here less because he's coming from the northern kingdom, right? He's coming from Naphtali, and he's bucking the theological slash religious hierarchy of his kingdom, the northern kingdom, in order to go to be true to the Judean. By the way, another reason he's a poster child, right, Steve? Because he's lifting up the house of David more than the,
Right.
Okay. So Les, you want to read for us verse 10, please?
Sure. After I was carried away captive to Assyria and came as a captive to Nineveh, every one of my kindred and my people ate the food of all of the nations. But I kept myself from eating the food of the nations because I was mindful of God with my heart. The Most High gave me favor and good standing with Shalmaneser, and I used to buy everything I needed. Until his death, I used to go into Media to buy for him there. And I left in trust bags holding 10 talents of silver with Gabael, the brother of Gabri, in the country of Media. But when Shalmaneser died and his son Sennacherib reigned in his place, Median roads became lawless, and I could no longer travel to Media.
Okay. So, initial reactions?
These are Assyrian kings.
Yes. Okay. And for those that weren't here, to remind those that were, there was a passage from the Babylonian Talmud on the first page that had kind of a conflation of different kings together that I brought to illustrate how a lot of the historians will go to this and try to figure out, does this match exactly what we know historical? Otherwise, to me, it's less important than the experience that he's conveying here of being exiled from his land and brought to Assyria. And then we'll get to what he did there. Yes, Don.
I was impressed that he had a discipline not to eat the food, but more than that, because he was obedient, the Most High gave him favor and good standing.
Right. So so that's a theological statement, right, Don?
I would think so.
If you keep God's laws, eating kosher is not about relations between one person and another. Our commandments are divided between relations between one person and another and relations between an individual and God. Most of what we will have in the book of Tobit will be, I believe, these kinds of relationships. But even when it's this kind of relationship, it pays off because it improves this kind of relationship for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and like Moses and Joseph and others who are living in foreign areas, like the Jews of the dispersion, it's kind of a model for, you keep your integrity and that's, instead of being oppressed by the foreign leader, you're lifted up.
Yeah, so that comment is a kind of a almost a postmodern comment, right? Which you just gave us here, I think, because we see that today in the way that we look at humanities and social studies, is that we can see that one of the ways to deal with being persecuted is to, call yourself by your own name, your own customs, whether we see that in African American culture or here where we live, where the tribe is relatively out there with, letting people know what their own customs are. Yeah, that's a way to deal with it. Here it's being presented as loyalty to God and loyalty to the people, I think, yeah. Um,
Would the rabbis have said that or thought that Joseph and Moses before Sinai were ruled by the laws of kashrut, or would they say no, those started only after Sinai?
Good question.
Yeah.
Where it comes up, maybe you know this from growing up, from hearing it when you were a kid in synagogue, the story of the three angels that visit Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham says, go get a kid and some milk, cheese. In the same sentence, there's milk and meat. And so the rabbis, will ask the question, well, what about the laws of kashrut? So there were those that say, well, the Torah hadn't been given yet, except for with the ancestors, Avram, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and Yaakov. They were given the Torah according to rabbinic life. So then the rabbis go back and say, well, he told her to get in the same sentence, but of course they separated them on the table. They didn't cook them together. Yeah. Yeah, those things come up from time to time, like how could Jacob marry two sisters? That's absolutely forbidden by the law of the Torah as ancestral. And the answer was, well, they knew the Torah, but they didn't have to keep everything when they were in abroad, out of the land, the diaspora, as Jacob was. But when Jacob comes back into the land, Rachel dies in childbirth. And the justification for that in rabbinic in the midrashes is that because they couldn't be married anymore. So anyway, so those things do come up.
Rabbi,
Yes, Don.
could you say a little more about um, the vertical and horizontal impact of having a bond with God? How having a bond with God improves our ability to relate to others?
Well, in this case here, it's rather simplistic theology. If you do what God wants, then God will influence the person with power over you so that you find favor in their eyes. So that's kind of a primitive I would call it a primitive type of theology, which is typical for this in rabbinic literature as well, and to this very day, right? People will pray for outcome between people, right? You know what I mean? But what I was saying is that when
I
you
think you're on to something, um, and I think it's outside of both people. The one who is offering um, obedience and the one who has the benefit of your love increasing for him or her. I think the strength of that is outside the parameters of two people. That it is a blessing, that it is a holy thing.
and that's certainly that would be the takeaway from God's blessings to Abraham and Sarah as well, right? And you shall be a blessing. Yeah, the ones who bless you will be blessed. Yeah, let's keep our eye on that. Okay.
Well, I do love that this translation, because I was mindful of God with all my heart, the Most High gave me favor and good standing. Now, maybe at this time he interprets that as a reward or a tit for tat, but in fact, I think just he was trustworthy, and maybe that integrity. But of course, it goes south pretty soon. He isn't so lucky as the story unfolds.
Yeah.
But I do love that phrase.
Okay. All right. But of course, my mind went immediately to another text that is from around the same period of time that is in the biblical canon. That is the book of Daniel, which some of us years ago studied together. And so, Megan, because I believe you were in that group, I seem to remember you were in that group. Could you read for us from Daniel 1, chapter 1? It's at the bottom of the second page, folks.
Sure. The king allotted daily rations to them from the king's food and from the wine he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's service. Among them were the Judahites, Daniel, Hanana, Mishael, Azariah. The chief officer gave them new names. He named Daniel Belteshazzar, Hanani, I can never say that, Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, Azariah, Abednego.
Okay, it continues on the next page.
Sorry, I have a bum paw here.
Oh no.
I know, getting better. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank. So he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile him. And God disposed the chief officer to be kind and compassionate toward Daniel. Yeah.
We have the same motif here, right?
Yeah.
If you keep kosher, the bureaucrats will be easy on you, or the police won't stop you, whatever. So that's one aspect of this. The other aspect, of course, is being careful about eating kosher. If we go back to the Judith Esther comparison, Esther, it doesn't, she's at the feast, she's at the table, she's doing everything with these people. We have to assume that she's eating and drinking, although it doesn't specifically say that she had any dilemma over it. And yet Judith, when she goes to meet Holofernes, the general whose head she famously cuts off and is shown in many, many paintings as holding it, anyway. She brings her sack of food with her. There's a detail like, why do we need to know that? She brings her sack with her own food and also her handmaiden, so she won't be alone in the room with the general, as opposed to Esther, who was sleeping with the guy, right? So you've got Daniel. Tobit is from the same cloth as Daniel in this. In other words, exiled, different tribes, but still exiled in the service of. But unlike Daniel, who was actually in the service of the king of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, Tobit here is not in the service in the same way. He does stuff for him. He's an agent for him, right? He's doing business with him. And business also, Don and Steve, is part of halakha. We have very strict rules about how to do business. I'm not saying every Jew follows those rules, but those rules are there. One last thing about the word that we have here that I think perhaps less when you read it, like you were wondering, what does it mean to eat the food of the nations? Why that word nations? Any guesses?
But it's translated goyim. Non-Jews.
Right, goyim. So just a word, so not everybody knows. A term in Yiddish, which is somewhat derogatory, that many of us grew up with. Perhaps we heard, I didn't hear from my father would not let us use it. My father was very progressive. Said the goyim. The goyim are the Gentiles. And also when you say it, the goyim, you emphasize the goyim. Now that word a goy, a non-Jew, a Gentile, which became somewhat derogatory when Jews were talking of non-Jews, at least in the 20th century, is actually not from Hebrew, it's from Yiddish. They know it from Yiddish. And in Yiddish, because of the experience of Yiddish-speaking Jews, which was always, almost always at odds with the non-Jewish community, they were the enemy, the goyim, and hence you have that emphasis, the goyim. But the word is a Hebrew word. In biblical Hebrew, it means nation. Nothing derogatory about it. It's a perfectly parv generic term for nations, goyim.
And in Greek, it translates as ethne.
Yeah, yeah. So there's nothing. So that's why the word. I think that's why they went for the translation here, nations, as opposed to even Gentile has a little bit tinge of negativity to it. I think, right? Yeah.
What does Anoim mean, David? Anoim?
What are we looking at?
No, I thought that was a non-Jew or Gentile or poor people. I'm not sure what the word.
Oh, there's a word aniyim. Aniyim in Hebrew is poor people. But
Yeah.
what's the context of your quoting or whatever you're thinking
Well,
of?
I'm not quoting, I'm remembering.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So aniyim are poor people. That's definitely not derogatory. That is almost always in context of compassion. Yeah. Okay. Comments or questions? So the two halachic issues that were brought up here now that I kind of prefaced today that I'd like to think about halakha, Jewish law, one is the eating of kosher, even though it doesn't say the words kosher. And yeah, okay. And of course you have to ask what did he eat? I think what it meant here, and that's what helps us, the book of Daniel perhaps helps us, is that he's eating seeds and raw vegetables and things like that, as opposed to cooked meats and maybe even bread. There is I think the Greek here actually the direct translation might be the bread of the nations, right? The bread of Gentile bread, and there is quite a bit of discussion about whether you can eat the bread of a non-Jew, even though it may be in its ingredients totally kosher, right? And that's to this very day. There are Orthodox Jews that will not eat bread that does not come out of a kosher bakery. So bread has a special law. Dairy products have a special law, and what developed certainly in the Middle Ages, and wine certainly has a special law, and that's already from the Torah. Okay. Comments or questions?
Of course, the details of that are much more intricate than what's based on what's written in the 5 books of Moses, which is pretty, generic.
Right, right. Take, for example, first of all, there's no laws of slaughtering in the Torah, and slaughtering is like a big deal. Like I actually skipped over that part of my rabbinic exam. I told them I'm a vegetarian. I don't really want to do this. So I'm actually, they let me do something else instead. So where you slaughter in the neck and how the knife has to be and how you salt the animal to get the blood out, I'm not such an expert at that. But none of that is in the Torah itself, the slaughtering part of it. Another thing that's well known, the Torah says in 3 different places that you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. That's the meaning of the words. A kid in its mother's milk. So why can't you have a calf with its mother's milk, right? It's a kid, it's not a calf. Or how about a kid in somebody else's, not his mother, a different goat's milk, right? Or and that's boiling it. Why can't you have a cheese and salami sandwich or Reuben, whatever the sandwich is called? All those things stemmed from what we call to make a fence around the Torah. So what Les is referring to is there's 2 aspects of it. One is there's only so much which is said in the Torah. Reality changes so much in thousands of years. So detail, and also the details were assumed to be known. Details aren't there anymore. Reality changes, but also there's a tendency, at least in rabbinic literature, and Don, this goes back to Jesus and the Pharisees as well, to constantly be building these fences around the Torah, concentric circles that get greater and greater and greater, so that you have a custom among some Jews of the world today that after eating meat, they will wait 6 hours before having any kind of milk product. And how do you get from the 3 kid in its mother's milk to there? But that's how religions work.
Or a different amount of time, milk after or meat after milk.
Right. All that has, by the way, all that has to do, that's based on Talmudic medicine. That's their understanding of digestion. And so and it's interesting because the Talmud doesn't have that waiting of time. It has separate meal. The waiting of time came afterwards. In amongst Dutch Jews, even the most Orthodox of Dutch Jews, Sasha would grew out of the Orthodox world in Amsterdam. The waiting time is only an hour.
Less lactose intolerance, evidently.
There you go. Okay. Rabbi Malka, how about doing 16 for us onwards?
In the days of Shalmaneser, I performed many acts of charity to my kindred, those of my people. I would give my food to the hungry and my clothing to the naked. And if I saw the dead body of any of my nation thrown out behind the wall of Nineveh, I would bury it. I also buried any whom King Sennacherib put to death when he came fleeing from Judea in those days of judgment that the King of heaven executed upon him because of his blasphemies. In his anger, he put to death many Israelites, but I would secretly remove the bodies and bury them. So when Sennacherib looked for them, he could not find them. Then one of the Ninevites went and informed the king about me that I was burying them, so I hid myself. But when I realized that the king knew about me and that I was being searched for to be put to death, I was afraid and ran away. Then all my property was confiscated. Nothing was left to me that was not taken into the royal treasury, except my wife Anna and my son Tobias.
Okay. So, initial reactions.
I love his honoring of the dead. That's very powerful.
There
To
is
me,
a, go ahead.
oh, I was just saying to me, both Tobit and Judith are really a manual that they're telling Jewish people how to live in a diaspora. This is, if you live in a diaspora now, this is your manual on what you should do.
Right. Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Harold. All right, we need, please unmute.
I'm not following the meaning of verse 18 quite. I don't understand why King Sennacherib was putting all these people to death. He says, I also buried any whom King Sennacherib put to death when he, is that the person who was put to death? When he came fleeing from Judea in those days of judgment that the King of heaven execute, I because of his blasphemies.
This is Sancheriv.
Lost.
So it's Sancheriv fleeing for his life because God changed the winds.
Okay, can you go through that again?
and as Sancheriv is fleeing, as often people do in war, they wreak destruction as they're fleeing. Think of modern history and people leaving the war and they're they don't care. They're part of their anger and their rage is taken out on the people that are outside. I think that's how I understand this.
Okay, so King Sennacherib, so it's referring to, you said the son of King Sennacherib or somebody, an Assyrian who was fleeing back from Judea to Assyria?
Yeah, and remember that passage from the Talmud. There's a problem also with the chronology because it's not in reality. That's not what there in historical reality. There's a fellow named Sargon the second who's in there, and that should be, and it's not Sancheriv, his son. So I don't. This is part of the historiosity which I don't think we can learn from it. Although there's a ton of scholarly work done on these kinds of things, but those are historians. And that was what I mentioned last week. I'm less concerned with the historiosity of it. But from a tale point of view was what it makes sense, what it's important here, Harold, of course, is that there were all these dead people that needed to be buried.
Right.
And there were his people. So it's not Sancheriv, it's not Sancheriv he was burying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's Israelites who had been put to death for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so he is taken upon himself, as Steve mentioned, this mitzvah of burying the dead.
Right.
From you, some of you may know that a burial society, a Jewish burial society, we call it shortly by the Chevra Kadisha. Chevra Kadisha is an Aramaic term, very similar to Hebrew. Chevra HaKadisha, Chevra HaKidosha. So Chevra, the group, the organization, the Holy Society. But in English you'll see it says burial society. So the truth is Chevra Kadisha is a short for Chevra Kadisha de shel Gimilut Chasadim shel Gabra Gimilut Chasadim shel Emet. It is the Holy Society for doing benevolent acts, true benevolent acts. And it adds the word true in Jewish tradition because if you could do something nice to your neighbor, but you might expect to get paid back at some point, they'll do something nice for you. If you do something nice for a person who's died, there's no payback for that. That's considered to be authentic, right? And true.
Yeah, it's one of the most altruistic things that one can do.
Right.
In Jewish tradition. Yeah.
And
So-
why would that offend the Assyrian overlords?
Well, I think there's two things here. The overlords, I think the assumption here is that in Assyrian society, when you kill somebody, you leave the body out to rot, to humiliate it, right?
Of course, yes.
And then the guy who told on him, though, that we should keep in mind maybe for, I don't remember exactly, but that might be some sort of a gun on the table kind of a thing. There's somebody's out to get him. And so they found something he's doing that we think is noble, but he used it against him, against Tobit. There's another kind of gun on the table thing. I don't know whatever that's called. This kind of foreshadowing that we kind of glossed over in the previous paragraph. That was the amount of money that he left with somebody. This huge amount, 10 talents of silver, this huge amount of money. And we don't hear about it afterwards, but it's noteworthy that here he ends up at this paragraph, he ends up penniless, right?
Why didn't Sennacherib take his wife Anna and his son Tobias? It seems like if he really wanted to punish him, he would do that.
Good point.
Weisnicht. Weisnicht is we would say. I don't know, but and of course the point of the story is to show that he's in trouble and he's poor. But we also going to need Anna and Tobias afterwards, right? We're going to need them.
Right.
Okay.
I also think that the commandment to bury the dead in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of instruction about if you don't do it the same day, the body is cursed or the land is defiled or
that's a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
that's a complicated issue, Steve, because the law in Deuteronomy is not talking about death per se. The law in Deuteronomy is talking about the person who's been impaled, punished by impalement or impaling, which is in other translations they translate it as hanging. We know today it meant impaling, which is a lot worse than being hung, I'm guessing. And that body who is actually, and that's connected to this because that body is not to be laid, why other cultures would be out there impaled on the walls of the city so that to humiliate and to discourage any troop. This is a horrible, it's like putting the heads on stakes kind of a thing. It's exactly like that. And the Torah says, no, we don't do that. A body is still sacred. So even if you punish somebody by impalement, which is one of the punishments in the Torah for horrible things that you might do between you and God, by the way, not between you and another person necessarily, we lay that body to rest. And so the rabbis learned from that, well, all the more so for anybody else. Yes, Wayne, I think you've wanted to say something for a while.
My question is, certainly it's wonderful that he did this. What's his motivation? Is there an admonishment somewhere in Jewish literature that compels him to do that? Or is he just a good guy? Is it something somebody else should have been doing? Or he's just a good fellow?
Yeah, I think, well, that's why Steve brought up the verse from Deuteronomy, because we do have that basis for you have to bear, you should not let the nightfall on a body outside. That's why the strict custom in Jerusalem to this very day amongst some of the burial societies is to bury the body the same day as death, which means a funeral at night sometimes with lanterns. It's a pretty eerie, strange thing. But usually within a day or two. That's why Jewish funerals are so quick. That is the custom. It stems from a respect for the body. On one hand, we want the body to be returned to the earth as soon as possible and to disintegrate, to decompose, and from earth to earth, literally from earth to earth. And that's why in Jewish law one does not embalm, because that keeps that process from happening. And at the same time, we can't keep the body around because of before refrigeration, rodents and decomposition. So that comes with what were non-Jews doing in the Middle Ages? I guess they were always embalming. I don't really know. I don't know the history of burial. But that's how we got to where we got to from a Jewish point of view. But we're going to see something now from a few centuries later. It's actually it's a few centuries later, but I think echoes the same thing that kind of addresses what you and others have been asked about. Why this focus on burial? By the way, there's a scholar whose name is Noel, and I didn't read it, but Carrie Moore brings her in a footnote. She has found that in 53 out of the 244 verses in the book of Tobit, death or burial is mentioned. That's pretty astounding. That's 22% of verses. Now, not all of them are in the context of caring for the dead, but that's pretty noteworthy, right? We have to think about that. Death is certainly key. And then we fast forward to 20th century, 21st century Jews. Jews get really finicky about death issues, the cremation question, Jewish cemetery questions. We can talk more at another time right now, but that's not concerning. Our author here wants to show that he's a super good guy. Why is he doing this? First of all, that's what you do. It's hard to do because the rules were against it. The government was against it. And it shows in the end, Wayne, it shows his devotion to God. It shows his piety. And my point in the beginning of our session today was to show that this piety, which is really a reflection of how of the horizontal relationships, is certainly seen as a vertical relationship with God. Yeah. So Wayne, if you would read from the passage in the Babylonian Talmud beneath this.
The 8 names of
No, this is on
the Second Kings.
This is on the third page.
I'm sorry.
The third page under the section we just did under 16 to 20.
Rabbi Hannah, son of Rabbi Hanina, asked, what does scripture mean when it says, walk after the Lord your God, from Deuteronomy 13:5? How can one walk in the holy presence? It is not written, for the Lord your God is consuming fire. Chapter 4, verse 24. Rather, one must follow the ways of the Lord. Just as God provides clothes for the naked, you shall provide clothes for the naked. Just as God visits the sick, as it is written, the Lord appeared to him, Abraham, and Eloni Mamre, Genesis 18:1. You too shall visit the sick. Just as God comforts the mourning, you too shall comfort the mourning. Just as God buries the dead, you too shall bury the dead.
Okay, so I truncated this a little bit, but basically this is, it's kind of a fake question, right? The text says, walk in the ways of the Lord. We all understand what that means, but somebody says, well, how can you walk in God's footsteps? God's footstep is a fiery furnace, and the full version of this has all these verses from Daniel and other places. How can we possibly do that? Oh, it doesn't mean walk in the actual way. It means you emulate God, you imitate the deity. And how do you imitate the deity? You do the things that God did in the stories, mostly stories of the Torah. The first one is you provide for the naked. When did God provide for the naked, clothes for the naked? With Adam and Eve.
Adam.
Yeah, when God made that garment, when they realized that they were naked. When did God visit the sick? the story that I mentioned before.
Abraham after circumcision.
The three angels visit Abraham. Exactly. When did God comfort the morning? This is a little bit trickier because it's not explicit, but it's known by the rabbis. When Abraham dies and God comforts Isaac. And finally, when does God bury the dead?
Moshe.
Right? Moses, in the last verses of the Torah, of the book of Deuteronomy, it says the place of Moses' burial is unknown. It's on Mount Nebo, overlooking Moab, overlooking the promised land. And he's and God self-buried Moses. So a common trait of all religions to imitate God. Let's quickly do the next one just so we can finish this. I'm sorry to cut off conversation, but Dan, Don, why don't you read for us 21?
But not 40 days passed before the two of Sennacherib's son killed him. And when they fled to the mountains of Ararat, his son Esau Hadon reigned after him. He appointed Ahikah, son of my brother Han'el, over the accounts of his kingdom, and he had authority over the entire administration. Ahikah interceded for me, and I returned to Nineveh. Now Ahikah was chief cupbearer, keeper of the signet, and in charge of administration and accounts under King Sennacherib of Assyria. So Esarhaddon appointed him as second in command. He was my nephew, and so a close relative.
Okay. So we'll have to postpone. I've got to get to something else now. But the two texts that I brought here, both from Genesis and Esther, are well-known scenes in which the king gives the power to the next in line, whether it's Haman and Esther or whether it's Joseph with Pharaoh. And this idea of this is part of folk tales, fairy tales, folk tales, right? This is what this stuff is. So aside from giving us this role model of how to act in the world, this is also an intriguing, interesting tale, which is very folk tale-ish, and brings our person in touch with world events, even though that's not the focus. So I think that is in order to lift the character in importance. The person is so important that it's even somehow connected to the fact that the two sons of Sancherib killed him and had to escape to Ararat. Okay. I have to go. Steve, I don't know if you want to continue with folks.
No, I've got to go too, but
okay.
I do have a interesting question from Deuteronomy next week, so I'll
Okay.
save it.
All right.
All
So
right.
I'll see you guys later. I apologize for leaving so quickly.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.